1 Corinthians chapter 10 is where we will begin in a moment. Several who were coming in, and if in the indication from just a few minutes ago when I was downstairs, there'll be others that are dropping some food off and coming in as we get started this morning. Let's begin this morning as we usually do with a word of prayer. Father, we're thankful for the day, for the time that we have to study, for this hour of study together. We are thankful for your word. We pray that we would glean much from it during this hour. Bless us in all that we do for you. It's in Jesus' name. Amen. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, we are looking at Paul in his talking to the Corinthians here about not only, as we've said before, apostasy, but also idolatry. We got he says a number of things about each of these, and we are heading towards chapter 11, which is going to be his discussion on the Lord's Supper. And as we started to see last time we were together, and as we'll see some more today, where that kind of, what do you call it? It flows nicely in together. When you read it all together, as the original letter was meant to be read, you can see those connections that are there. But sometimes when we have these chapter blocks, or we have the 45 minutes that we have to study together, sometimes it gets separated in our minds, and so it does well for us to notice some of these connections and how the mind works when Paul is writing this, and the Spirit is instructing him on what to write, where he goes from one to the other. Let's get our thoughts of where we were last time we were together. Hang on. This is the wrong one here. Let me make sure where we are. 14 and 15, 16. I think I sent the wrong one to him. My mistake there. Let's go. I think we're on verse 17. That's where we're going to be. No, it was 18. We'll get there together. A little bit of surprise. My bad on that one. All right, verse 18. That's where we want to be there. She's finding it for me. There we go. All right, so we were talking about the practices, the temple, the participants that are there in the temple. Paul is connecting the idea of Israel of old, how they fell in the wilderness because of their sin, and they didn't make it to the promised land. And Paul is connecting that to us today. We can, after we've escaped sin, can fall along the way and not make it to the promised land. The idea of apostasy. We've talked about this both in this class, and Sam has mentioned it several times on in his Wednesday night class, because a number of denominations teach the impossibility of apostasy. The Israelites, in their mind, could escape Egypt, and not one of them died along the way, because it didn't matter what they did, God was still going to save them physically. That's the illustration anyway. I don't think no one would say that. But the Christian can fall along the way. The Christian can decide, as Israel did, to go back in their hearts. And so Paul is reminding them over and over again to look at the people of Israel. But he also is connecting the idea of the priests there. The priests for Israel were the ones who ate the sacrifices that the people brought. And then we made the connection that we as Christians, all of us are priests. And the way that we worship is important, because Paul says the way that they worshiped was important. They were together. They ate of those sacrifices that were brought. And they were partakers, or to use the word here in verse 18, they were partners in the altar. Remember, he said in verse 12, we're still talking about that idea of the person who thinks he stands alone. God has left me. I'm by myself. I have to figure it out on my own. Well, that's not true. Even Israel of old, even the priests that go to the sacrifice, even though they are separated from the rest of Israel in a way of speaking, they were not alone. They had each other. They had God. And so the same is true for each of us, as we are priests as well. We're separated, or at least in a certain way of thinking about it, we should be separate from the world, and yet we're not alone. And so he's making that connection that is here. That priest's privilege is that it was to eat of the altar. He became a participant not only with his fellow priest, but also with God. And a couple of ideas are going to come up because of this that he's going to mention. I'll try to be quiet and we'll read it here in a moment. But even though the priests didn't have anything to do with that altar other than they were working with it, they still were able to participate in it. Which of those priests led the children of Israel out of Egypt? None of them. Which of us gave ourselves, our lives on the cross? None of us. And yet those Levites were still able to partake at the altar. We as priests today are able to partake at the altar as well when we come to worship. So again, he's drawing these parallels. He's using the Old Testament in the way that it's supposed to be used to draw these illustrations that we've mentioned as well. And again, because I've sent the wrong one here, we're going over things that we've already talked about. I don't want to do that. Chapter 10 is taking long enough. Let's go to verses 19 and 20, and we'll get those together there. What do I mean then? The food that's sacrificed to idols is anything, or that an idol is anything? No, but I say that the things which the Gentiles sacrifice, they sacrifice to demons and not to God. And I do not want you to become partners with demons. Here's the second idea that he adds in here, because he's already talked about when we are worshiping together, or we in the Christian life, our Christian lives are together. We're partners together. But then he also uses this idea of eating meat or participating in worship for another god. And remember, when we were talking about Corinth, we've seen the pictures, we've seen the map of where these things were. This huge area that was in the middle of the city where you could go and buy all kinds of things, including meat that had been offered to idols. And he's already talked about scruples and how it wasn't a problem. You could eat the meat that had been offered to idols. There was no problem with that, unless you personally had a problem with it, in which case, don't touch it. But now he is talking about not eating the meat that's offered to idols, but going and worshiping at those temples, which perhaps some were doing, or perhaps some were asking Paul, is it okay to do that? If the idol truly is nothing, if a meat had been offered to an idol, I could eat that meat because the idol is really nothing. It's stone, it's gold, it's silver, it's nothing. It's not real. And so if the idol is truly nothing, what's wrong with going and worshiping at the temple? And so in a way, Paul has, and he does this so well in other books, as Romans, for example, he anticipates the questions that are going to come from his answers, and he answers them before they're even asked. And so you can kind of see the thought process that some of these perhaps had. Well, if Paul says it's okay to eat meat offered to idols, well, then I can go to these temples and I can participate in the worship of the temple, because the idol's nothing. And so who cares? I'm not really worshiping it because it's not real. It's not a real God. And you remember that some of those temples, the one of Aphrodite that was on top of that hill behind Corinth, there was a sexual immorality that took place there. That was part of their worship. And so I can go there and participate in that and not be doing anything wrong. And so Paul is anticipating that, and he's saying, well, hang on. You can eat the meat offered to idols because you're not engaged in what people are seeing. They're not, no one sees you at the temple. You're just eating the meat that's been brought from the temple. Nothing wrong with that. But I cannot sacrifice or be engaged in worship to a false god and not appear to other people like I am. He's wanting them to realize that people are watching you, and they see you partake of the Lord's Supper, or they see you going to worship, and they see what you're doing, and what they see, unfortunately, many times is that's what they think you believe. That's why it's very important for us to realize that our actions are very important. We, as I've said before, we judge ourselves by our intentions. What I intended to do was this, therefore what I did was excused. But we judge other people based upon their actions, and that's what people do to us. What people see us doing, that's oftentimes what they think we believe or what we think is right, even if that's not right. I don't believe that, and maybe you saw incorrectly, but what people see is what's important, and that's what they think you believe. So he was trying to correct this, again, this church that had so many problems because they were surrounded by the world, which all the churches Paul wrote to were surrounded by the world. But the world was getting into the church, and this was the problem. He was trying to get that out of there, get this leaven that was, that in this instance was their example, get that out of there. What am I saying by this, Paul said? That the food is sacrificed to idols is anything, or the idol is anything? Is the food anything? No, it's just meat. And if you have a problem with it, don't eat it. But if you don't worry about it. If you go and participate with those idols, however, people are immediately going to think that's what you believe. You can say all that you want to about how Zeus or Mars or all these other gods are false and not real. But if you are looking to the world like you worship them, they're not going to believe you. Because you can say it all you want to. And so again, none of us here are going to leave this place, and we're not going to go to a Greek god's temple and worship. However, we can leave this place and the rest of the week make it seem to other people like what we do in here really doesn't matter, because we live like the world perhaps the rest of the week. During the working hours or at school or wherever, and we go, and at those places we are different than we say we are here. Which one is the world going to believe? 6 out of 7 days I'm living like the world, and for a few hours on that 7th day I am acting in a completely different way. Paul is, among other things, talking about their hypocrisy. That word hypocrisy has to do with wearing a mask. I'm a different person, and I take that mask off, and other people see a different person than is there. In 2 Corinthians, when Paul gets to their next letter, inspired letter he writes to them, he's going to say, among other things there, 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verses 14 through 18, about their not being unequally yoked with unbelievers. We talked about that verse before when we talked about marriage. And I said, as far as I can tell, the unequally yoked is much more broad than being married to someone. I don't think it's saying we can't be married to someone who's not a Christian, because Paul tells them not to divorce their non-Christian spouses. But the unequally yoked here is don't have a relationship with anybody that makes you feel like you must be unfaithful to Jesus. And being surrounded by the world, and we have all these influences on us, and I feel like I cannot be a participant in a culture if I do not participate in whatever it is that's sinful. I feel compelled to go to the temple, if we're going to use their idea. I don't need to have a relationship like that. I don't need to be so ingrained into a culture where I feel like I must be involved in that and do those things. And so he's going to remind them of those things. He's going to tell them things that they need to understand at a later time. But perhaps he is mentioning that here as well. Don't let any unbeliever, a spouse, a business associate, a friend, a family member, don't let anyone lead you away from the Lord. Because I am a participant. I have to pick the temple where I'm worshiping. Am I a participant at the temple of God, where I am surrounded by Christians of like precious faith who are influencing me for good? Or am I going to the temple of these Greek gods, temple of the world, and I'm going to worship there? Because I really cannot be both, as Jesus said, and Paul is hinting at that here. I can't be both. Some in the Corinthian church were trying to be. They would worship in the way that they did, that Paul was talking to them about, and he's going to correct. But then they would also go during the week to those other temples. I can eat the meat, so why can't I go to the temple and worship the God? It's nothing. It doesn't matter. You said we can justify anything. We literally can justify anything. One of the things that Sam talks about on Wednesday night is all of these denominational groups. And he goes through and he takes the ideas that each of them have, the tenets, what do you call it? What do you call it? Each one of those, the creeds, their creeds. Each one of those has behind it a justification that a man or group of men have come up with. They're just justifying the idea. I can take this idea that I want to do, and I can run it through its full course, and here we have a brand new denomination. And so they justified worshiping at these temples. And Paul's telling them, you can't do that. Just because the idol is nothing, people's minds and what they think you're doing is something. Be careful of your influence. Be careful what you're doing. While there may be things that we can do or that we are able to do, Paul says what people think you're doing many times is more important than what you're actually doing. And so how do you appear before people? Have no appearance of evil, Paul would later say. Have no appearance of those things. Don't appear like you're doing anything. Going into the temple, don't do that, because people will think immediately that person worships that God. And certainly we need to be careful in how we look, how our actions are. If I sit at the table and I eat the meat with the Gentile, to use the idea that he's using here, I cannot go from there and come from the Lord's table. They were trying to have both feet, one in the world and one in the church. And that's perhaps always been a problem or a temptation for God's people. We want to be like the nations round about us. A lot of those, again, those denominational groups that brought in instruments or that took the Lord's Supper once a quarter, whatever, many of them were doing it, well, they weren't doing it because they saw it in the Scriptures. Many of them did it because they wanted to be like other people. Let's be like all of these other groups around us, these religious groups. So when we do those things, we'll be like they are. And so that's the idea here. So as he said, the Gentiles sacrificed to demons, the idea of the idols there, things that are wrong. They weren't actually necessarily worshiping Satan or demons. Particularly, the idea is that they were worshiping things that they shouldn't. If I sit with them, I have fellowship with them. Be careful. Again, be careful in how you are perceived by other people. When it appears like I'm practicing a false religion, I am. Now, that I don't have to go set foot in any denominational church building to get people to think that I'm following a false religion. The things that I say, the things that that people see me doing. Now with social media, the things that people, see that I get to say. There's a lot of good that can happen with social media, but there's a lot of bad that can happen as well, because now just about everybody's thoughts, the moment you think them just about, the whole world knows them. It used to be, I hate to sound like that, but back in my day, whenever somebody thought something that was silly, no one knew about it. Now we know everybody's thoughts. So be careful the things that we say or share or, that we put out there, because things that people see, many times that's what they judge. Now they shouldn't, and we shouldn't do that. Judge not according to the appearance, but judge righteous judgments. But let's face it, we're humans, and we do that. And so we need to be understanding how others can see us. Let's get verse 21 here, and we'll see if there are any comments or questions. You cannot drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of demons. You cannot partake in the table of the Lord and the table of demons. So he's mentioned the idea that the priests eat of that table, the sacrifices, and their partners together. But then he's also taking this idea that they are wanting to partake of the table, to use that same idea, of demons. So you have the Lord who's offering them the cup from this table, and then you have these false gods that are offering them the cup as well. And the Corinthians are saying, I'll take both, and I'll drink them at the same time. And that's going to make a mess of everything. And so they needed to choose, which one are you, and which one are you all the time? You cannot be both. Jesus said we cannot serve God and mammon, God in this world. We have to make that choice. We'll see our notes here in verse 21, but open it up for questions, comments here on this one. Again, their influence and how they were perceived was important. I cannot live for the devil. I cannot live as the world does for 6 days and make it up on Sunday. We think, perhaps, I say we, sometimes people think that when they take the Lord's Supper, and that is some kind of magical, mythical thing that we do, that's what it is to worship. As long as I take the Lord's Supper, I've worshiped. Well, we've got the wrong idea, and we'll talk about that in chapter 11. And so if I come to worship and I'm here on Sunday, well then that's who I am. And the rest of the week doesn't really matter. Paul said it does matter. And again, if I cannot give up my salvation, if I cannot live in a way where I'm no longer saved, why is Paul telling them this? I know he's telling them this to watch their influence because of other people, but he's also warning themselves. If I go to that temple and try to live like the world, well, and then I am the world. I am in the world. Is that Gentile? And again, he's using that to mean someone who's not a Christian. Is that person sinning? Is he lost when he goes to those temples and worships? Yes, he is. And if I go and partake with him, whether I believe it or not, I'm also lost. And again, draw that parallel to your own life and the things that you see around you. How is the person who is doing wrong in this world, is he wrong, committing sin? Yes. But am I, when I line myself up with him, either in things that I say or share or do or things like that, then yes, of course I am. And so there's no difference there. There's no distinction. There probably is in my mind. I don't think anybody who's doing wrong is in their minds doing wrong. We can justify a lot of things. But the person who's doing wrong and the person that is participating with him, both of them are wrong. And so he's warning them about living in the world or trying to live like the world. That word demons there, as we've mentioned, comes from the idea there in Deuteronomy 32, where they sacrificed unto devils, not to God. Anything that's not God is of this world. The devil, demons, that's the idea there. I don't have to go to a church that's worshiping actually Satan in order to be doing wrong. Anything that's contrary to God's will is the same thing. There's two roads, and that's my choice. The narrow, difficult one or the wide, smooth one. It was very easy for the Corinthians to look around them and see the easy way to live. Live like we've always lived. Live like the Greeks. Live like the Corinthians around us. And Paul said you have to make a choice, whether you're going to be this way, as it's very easy to be, or that difficult, sometimes difficult, narrow way that is the Christian life. And so, again, they were trying to walk both of them, and you're not going to be able to do that. It'll split you right in two. And so the idea there that they were choosing both of those roads. Anything there, verse 20, 21. Self-explanatory, I hope, but perhaps there are some comments you want to make. All right, verse 22. Or do we provoke the Lord to jealousy? We're not stronger than he, are we? All things are permitted, not all things are of benefit. All things are permitted, but not all things build people up. Again, looking at verse 20, the verse we just noticed, verse 21, you cannot drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of demons. Or do we provoke the Lord to jealousy? What did what did the Israelites do? They came out of that land there. They were excited. They were free. They sang and danced. They were so excited that God had saved them from slavery. And then they get to that mountain when God is going to introduce himself to them with his law, with his lawgiver, and these things that go along with that. And when Moses is gone, they think God has brought us out here to die. What kind of God is that? And so they started acting just like the Egyptians did. Where did they get the idea for that calf or worshiping idols? Where did they get that idea? They didn't come up with it. They just did what the Egyptians did. Look how great they were as an empire at that time. Probably the greatest in the world at that time. They worshiped gods, and so let's do that. Where had Aaron learned to fashion a golden calf out of melted gold? Probably something he had learned and been exposed to in Egypt. And so they provoked God, not just then, but in other ways. They said, Egypt was better. We had food there. We had the leeks and the melons and other things back in Egypt. And here we are eating this quail every day and this manna that comes out. We don't even know what it is, and this is all that we've got to eat. We miss the variety we had in Egypt. Memory and nostalgia are just sometimes can be a little bit crazy for us. They were nostalgic for Egypt and Egyptian slavery, and that was provoking God to jealousy. He wanted them for his people, and his people were wanting to go back into the world. In their minds, they had already done it, and some of them tried to do it physically. And so, again, picture our God who has done everything that we could not do. He saved us. He's brought us out of slavery of sin. We are excited. We get like that eunuch. We go on our way rejoicing. And then after a while, we start to pine for the good old days when we lived in sin and were comfortable. And God says, these are my people, and they want to go back into the world. And so be careful how we are perceived by the world, and of course, as well, by God. And then he says here in verse 23, all things are permitted, but not all things are of benefit. If we look at verse 23 there in the King James, all things are lawful, but not all things are expedient. So you can see the translation there, the idea there, all things are not for benefit. All things are lawful for me, but not all things edify, or not all things build people up. Now, is he saying that everything that everybody can do is lawful for the Christian? I can do whatever I want because all things are lawful? No. Inside of that sphere that is Christianity, inside of the law of Christ, I can do all those things. But there are some times when doing those things is not always the best thing to do. Remember back when we were talking about when they were taking each other to court. Those Christians there in Corinth, that, just like the world around them, love to go to court for just any old thing. And they would go there and they would, as we said, air their dirty laundry in front of those 100 or 200 people that would be as the jury in that situation. And can I take people to court? Can I use the court system and the laws that we have in this country as a citizen? Absolutely. And I don't think there's anything that's wrong with that in and of itself. But there were some times, and Paul gives a good example here, when that's not really the best thing to do. It's not really the best thing to go and defraud, take from other people just because I can do that. I need to think, how is this going to be perceived? If someone comes and steals from me and I call the police, are you going to think badly of me for doing that? I don't think so. I mean, that's certainly my right and according to the law there. But in certain situations, and they had found one here, when doing what the law said was not really the best thing because people were getting the wrong idea of who Christians are. They were getting the wrong idea of what it was like to be a member of the body of Christ. So all things are permitted. I can follow the law. But sometimes not all things are of benefit or expedient, the best thing to do. All things are permitted in Christ, but not everything all the time builds people up. We talk about those scruples. Can I eat that meat that's offered to idols or celebrate that particular holiday or eat in the building or what have you? Can I do those things? Sure. But is it always something that edifies people? Not always. And when I find myself in a place where I have to choose between edifying my brethren or doing what I want just because I can, I need to choose the former. Helping people. Just because I can do something doesn't mean that it's going to be perceived that way with other people. Expediency there, the way in carrying out a command. All things in the law of Christ are permitted or lawful, but not everything is carrying it out in the right way, for the right reason. Expediency there. Sometimes someone do something and we'll say, well, their intentions were good. My intentions were, well, our intentions aren't always, certainly not how we're judged by other people. That doesn't matter as much as what we actually did and how it was perceived. Now, we shouldn't go around, don't misunderstand, we shouldn't go throughout life worrying about everything we do and how it's perceived in the world. We get into this idea where we talk about political correctness and stuff, and I have to follow if we tried to make everything we did look right to everybody, we'd never do anything. We'd never be able to do anything. Because someone's going to be offended in the modern context of the word, and sometimes people are going to be upset by things that we do and say. All things were lawful for Jesus, and when it came to building people up, he did that. But there were times when he upset people because of and he knew the specific person and how he needed to reach them. And so again, sometimes things we do and say upset people. But the idea here is someone who is good and honest, are they going to see what I do and say, and are they going to be led closer to Jesus, or are they going to be led further away from him? That's the biblical idea of offense. I separate someone from Jesus because of my actions. And so the idea there hopefully is clear. Can I eat in the building? Sure. But if it causes you to think that it's okay for you to do that and you have a scruple about it, well then I don't think that you should be forced to eat with us. If it comes right down to it, I'll eat at home and I won't have to eat there if it comes down to that. Again, the idea here is not that you see me do it, but that it causes you to think that it's okay for you to do it. And if you have a scruple against it, then that's a problem for you, if you think there's a problem with it. So I can't go to the temple and sin, but if I can't do that, then how do I become all things to all people? Paul said, I've become all things to all people, that by the means of some I might save some. How do I become all things to all people if I can't go into the temple and worship with them? I can try to convert someone and talk to someone about the dangers of alcohol, and I don't have to step foot inside a bar, where that's all that they serve. I don't have to go to where all people go in order to reach people. I've got to be careful about how I'm doing it. Let's say I have a Bible study set up with someone. I'm not going to set it up in a bar because that's where they are on a Friday night or Saturday night or something. Let's have it at a different place where people don't think that just because I'm going in there that I'm participating in what's happening in that place. So again, just because my intentions are good, just because what I was going to do was right, doesn't mean I can always do that. I need to keep in mind, how does this appear? How is it going to appear to other people whenever I'm doing these things? Questions, comments there through verse 23. Yes, sir. Brother Franklin.
When he's talking about all things, law, he's not talking about things that's wrong. He's talking about things that in and of themselves are not wrong. That's the all that he's talking about. He does not mean that he can commit sin, he can drink, curse, and do whatever he wants to. Things that are wrong in and of themselves, he cannot do.
Yeah, you're right. Inside the sphere of Christ's law, all things are lawful. But once I get outside of that, those things aren't lawful. Right. Yeah, some might take that verse and say, well, Paul said all things are lawful. Everything. Well, we've already seen 9 chapters plus of things that aren't lawful. So if Paul is saying that all things are lawful, what's the point of the last 9 plus chapters? Is division lawful? No, it's not. Taking each other to court in the way they were doing it? No. Violating scruples? No. All of those things were not lawful. And so he's not saying that. You're right. And if I didn't say it, that certainly said it very plainly. Not every action or thought is lawful. What he's talking about is inside the law of Christ, I can do all things that are there. But sometimes doing what I can do is not always the best thing. I have to take it situation by situation. How is this going to be perceived in this moment by this person? That means we have to stop and think before we say, click post or share or whatever it is. And that's one of the reasons why the Christian life is the narrow, difficult way. Because the world, first thing I think, I say. First thing that I like, everybody sees it. And go and do. I don't have to consider my action. Doesn't matter. Christian life is different. And I have to consider my neighbor there, and he's going to mention that in the next verse. Very good. Anything else through verse 23? No one is to seek his own advantage. I believe the word there is wealth. No one is to seek his own advantage, but rather that of his neighbor. The kind of idolatry that we mentioned in this chapter earlier, I called it self-idolatry. I'm by myself in this world. No one can do it for me. I must do it myself. That's where the Israelites were at the foot of the mountain. Though there were hundreds of thousands of them, they still thought that they were by themselves. And so I've got to figure it out on my own. And what does that lead to? Idolatry. The one who thinks he stands alone needs to take heed lest he fall, because I can't do it on my own. And so I have this kind of self-idolatry. So here, Paul gets to this conclusion here, where he says, no one should seek his own advantage. I should not be out for what is mine. The Christian does not think in those terms. You've heard the definition of joy, I'm sure. That in joy, J-O-Y, we think of Jesus first, others second, and yourself third. And that's how you get joy in this world. The world looks at it in the exact opposite way. I'm out for myself, my advantage. What do I need to do to improve my life, my status, my place in my job that I have? How can I go up the ladder? And so again, that's the world. That is in many ways easy to do. We have that kind of survival instinct. But no one should be seeking his own advantage, but rather that of his neighbor. That's the theme there of what we call the Good Samaritan. What was the easy thing for him to do? Well, the Levite walked by on the other side. Those were the easy things to do. The Samaritan, it was really difficult for him to do that. And again, he didn't know who that person was. He didn't know who that man who was left among thieves. Perhaps he deserved that plight where he had found himself. And what if he woke up at that inn and he left a blank check there for him? What if he is someone who's on drugs or drinks or is going to take advantage of me and he's going to run up a huge bill? So what I'm going to do is not going to help him. The person who is following the law of Christ says, I'm going to seek not my advantage and what's good for me, although that is on the list of things I need to be concerned about. It's not at the top. I'm going to seek my neighbor better. Now here in this context, he's only talking about their actions, how they are perceived. I'm not going to think, what can I do? I'm going to think, what's beneficial for other people to see me do. or say or this kind of thing. But the same is true for our lives, our actions as well. Helping other people. The word wealth there in that particular verse was at 23, 24. Let no man seek his own, but every man another's wealth there. That word was added there. He's not talking about just money. I'm not seeking to make other people wealthy. Seeking helping other people. The advantage of others is what I'm concerned about. Helping other people. The easy thing for Jesus to have done was to stay in heaven. Okay, that was the easy thing to do. The difficult thing was to make upon himself a form of a servant, humble himself, be crucified for the advantage of others. That was difficult. And so he made that choice. If you want to draw a parallel, what is it, Philippians, for our sakes, he became poor. Though he was rich, though he had a lot of wealth in that way of thinking, for our sakes, he became poor. For the sake of others, make yourself poor. Not necessarily financially, although we should be looking to help others financially. But just because I can do something doesn't mean that I always should. How is it going to be perceived? How is this going to affect other people? It is a moral impossibility to hold on to the Lord with one hand and the Lord with one hand and the world with the other. I can't do it. I have a double standard. To use the words of the inspired writer James, I have a double mind. A double-minded man is unstable in all his ways. When people see me acting one way during the week and another on the weekend, who am I? I certainly can't be trusted. And so a double-minded man is unstable in all his ways. This is the man that Paul has in mind here in 1 Corinthians 10, verse 24, that he's talking about in this context. I'm going to the temple of the Lord, the church, worshiping with the people of God, and then I'm going to the actual temple of these false gods during the week. He said, that's unstable. You cannot convert anyone that way, because I'm supposed to be living the Christian life and be salt and light and this kind of thing, and I can't when I'm trying to be like the world. Jesus talked about that when he said that you are the salt of the earth. If the salt has lost its savor, what's it good for? But to be cast out and trodden under the foot of man. Salt was used in those days a lot of times as money. I've mentioned before, and you probably already know, that many of the soldiers were given salt for their salary. That's where we get that word salary from. But salt, because it was white and fine, sometimes people notice that there are certain types of sand that look a lot like salt, that are white and fine. And if I took half of my salt, divided it, and I put just as much sand in a bag of salt, I got double my money like that. And so they could buy more because they've added sand, dirt, to their bag of salt, and they've added to their wealth. And if you do that enough times, what have you got in your bag? You've got nothing but sand. And so you take that, it's good for nothing but to be cast out and trodden underfoot of man, where it came from in the first place, that sand. And so when we let the world in and we try to be more like the world, and hey, this will be easier and this will make my life better and this will give me an advantage, and here comes that sand. Before long, I'm nothing but the world, just wrapped up in a nice package that claims to be a Christian. And so he's wanting them to be aware of their influence, be aware of their actions and how they are perceived by other people in that world. I said a lot, anything verse 24 up to that point. Again, our influence, our actions, important. Verse 25, eat anything that's sold in the meat market without asking question for the sake of conscience. Again, we go back to that meat. They had a problem with it. I'll try to be brief in this because the context and history and all that stuff is probably not interesting to you. But the meat market that they had there, that Malakoi that was there, various markets that they had at that time, you could buy all kinds of meat that was there. And Paul was telling them, those that wanted to do this, go eat any meat that's there. No one thinks differently of you when you go to the grocery store and you pick out that meat that's there. No one thinks differently of you. It's sold there. Anybody can buy it. It's there. Go ahead and buy it. Don't ask where it came from, though. He says, don't make a point out of it. Apparently, perhaps some of them were only wanting what was, which god was this offered to? I want the one that's offered to Zeus, just to prove to you of how spiritual I am. This is the big guy. This was offered, and I'm going to eat this meat because I'm such a good Christian. Maybe that's the idea. I'm adding my own thoughts to it. But they were after those meats that were there. And so Paul said, go, take it, just eat it. What are you trying to do? Am I trying to feed my family and myself, or am I trying to make people in awe of how spiritual I am? Again, so my intentions here are certainly under consideration. Eat anything sold in the meat market without asking question for the sake of conscience there. Don't ask about it. It's just meat. So then treat it like that. Just go eat it. And so he tells them, eat only that thing and don't worry about it. And that bell, Rodney, I tell you. And so we'll have just a couple of minutes here. So he's going to get to the point where he tells them, if someone puts meat in front of you, eat it. Don't ask where it's from. But if they tell you, hey, this was offered to an idol, what are you going to do about it? Paul said, even though it's really no big deal, that person's testing me. That person has a conscience problem. So don't eat it. Again, the situation tells me I should do something differently than what I could actually do. The meat's nothing. But if someone gives it to me and says, oh, this was offered to an idol, then you say, well, I'll abstain, because obviously you have a problem with it. And so he's just going to give them an example of a situation dictating how I do. I'm not a proponent of situational ethics, okay? It's never wrong to lie. It's never wrong to lie. Can we delete that, please? It's never, glad this isn't recorded. It's never right to lie. It's never wrong to do right. It's never right to do wrong. Slow down. But there are times when it's not appropriate to do something, even though just because I can. There are times when we have to be considerate of other people and what our actions look like and how they are going to affect someone's soul. That's the reason I'm here. That's why we're doing what we're doing. It's for other people and for others' advantage in gaining Christ. And anything I do that separates them from that advantage, it's wrong to do, at least in that situation. And so I need to be careful with that. Anything else before we are dismissed? I'll stop a little early right there. All right. Thank you very much for your attention. I appreciate it.